Hi, it's Dr. DiBiase, and I'm going to be providing a little bit of a week 5 overview in terms of the readings that we're doing for this week. Some of you may have started, some of you may not have started, but this will give you some insight into things that you might want to be thinking about as you go through the readings for this week, because they will be important, I think, for helping us to make more sense of what's going on in the Deborah Brandt piece that we read last week. So this week, we're going to be looking at these 3 readings. Tejada, Gutierrez, Galindo, Wallace, and Castaneda, challenging our labels, rejecting the language of remediation. We're going to look at Cisneros' Only Daughter, and Rue's Why Don't More Boys Read Little Women. So the first of these articles, the Tejada et al. Piece, really looks at the question of what does it mean to be placed in a remedial writing classroom, and what are the ways in which that occurs, and what role does testing and standardized testing play in that? And along the way, it gets into questions of how issues of race, ethnicity, class all play a role in the way in which individuals get sponsored, or in the way in which resources are allocated by institutional sponsors to support those individuals. In the Cisneros piece, Sandra Cisneros, who you might know if you ever read A House on Mango Street, sort of the work that she's most famous for, and it's used to be frequently taught in schools. She writes about her experience being the only daughter in her family. She has a lot of siblings who are brothers, and she speaks a little bit about um, how her experience of being the only girl in the family impacted the way in which the sponsorship of her literacy took place, particularly in terms of decisions about why her father wanted her to go to college. And then finally, we're going to look at Rue. Again, I say finally, you don't have to read these in this order. But Rue is asking the question very literally, why don't more boys read Little Women? And really, this is just a way into a broader conversation about decisions that are made at the school level in terms of what texts students are required or encouraged to read, right? And why is it that schools tend to privilege works of literature that feature male protagonists? And so in charting sort of the history of this text and how it's been used in schools in the past and how it's been perceived by readers in the past, she wants to raise certain questions about the relationship between like Cisneros, gender and sponsorship, but also like Tejada and the other co-authors, how assumptions about the people being sponsored shifts the way that sponsorship happens. So here are some questions that I would like you to think about as you're going through these readings, and these questions will form the basis of your short writing for this week. So with Tejada et al., how do decisions about who belongs where impact literacy scholarship? I should say literacy sponsorship, right? So how do assumptions about who belongs in college, who belongs in a 4-year college versus a 2-year community college, shape the way that resources get allocated to different students? What role does testing play in assessing literacy? So is it okay for a standardized like grammar test to determine what courses you take? Especially when being placed into a remedial class might mean that you have to pay additional money for extra credits before going into the core curriculum of your institution. How do assumptions based on race, ethnicity, and class impact the kinds of sponsorship that students receive? And we see this particularly in the account of Esther, who will talk in paragraphs 36 and 37 about comments that even her high school teachers made about the kinds of future opportunities that their high school was preparing those students for, right? Finally, how might the experience of these students and the fact that they were able to conduct research on these questions and get published reflect Brandt's notion of literacy reappropriation? And so that's a question I want you thinking about, and we'll come back to that in a subsequent lecture. In the Cisneros essay, we want to think about how does gender impact sponsorship for Cisneros, right? In what ways does her gender and her culture and the intersection of the two of those shape the way her father thinks about why she should be going to college, or if she should be going to college? And I'd like to see if you can think of some more contemporary versions of this issue, right? So you know, Cisneros is in about her 60s right now, so this was several decades ago, and yet it's worth thinking about what role gender might play in the kinds of literacies that we are encouraged to pursue. And then finally, thinking about how does Cisneros reappropriate her father's sponsorship on college, right? How does she, as we'll see in the reading, how does she sort of take his intentions and the sponsorship that comes with those intentions and then use them towards her own goals and ends? In the Rue piece, where she's looking at the question of why don't more boys read Little Women, there's a couple of other questions we can ask, and many of them connect to some of the other questions that we could ask with these other readings. So again, how do assumptions about those being sponsored impact the decisions of institutional sponsors? So for example, right, she wants to ask the question about how do assumptions that are made about boys and girls, or young men and young women's reading habits shape the way that schools approach which books they're going to ask people to read. Additionally, what concerns does she raise about where sponsorship occurs? So some of the people that she interviews in her essay suggest, well, Little Women is okay for people to read at home, but it's not really okay for school. And this is a problem for Rue, and I want you to think about why she might see that as a problem, right? Why is it problematic that that sponsorship could happen in one place but not in another? And then finally, if we go back to Deborah Brandt, she argues that cultural and political factors shape how literacy is sponsored, right? And the decisions that sponsors make and which literacies are valued. And so I want you to think, as you're looking at the Rue piece, where might we see evidence of that in this essay, right? Where might we see evidence of Rue suggesting that shifts in either our political culture or our sort of our social culture, our political environment, our social environment, our cultural environment might have had an impact on the way that perceptions about Little Women and who should read it and why maybe have shifted over time. So I hope you enjoy these readings. I should say I enjoy these readings, although they make me very angry in a lot of ways because they not because I disagree with the arguments, but because I think that they're raising some really really good arguments and pointing out some really problematic issues that I'm interested to hear your take on. So good luck with the reading this week, and I look forward to continuing these conversations moving forward.